no intro because I suspect this live demo is going to be longer since I've done 5 trips, basically back to back. And since all 5 are very unique and big bueno, I won't be doing much of my usual, Funame, work, read, murder kittens, and then slept summaries. I usually, I honestly think that I'm overcommitted this, full month because I actually did way too much stuff. But, oh well, 'twas good, and I have so much to share, so may the life update of travel begin. The night directly after I finished my last live update, I proceeded to get 4 hours of sleep before Morgan picked me up at an ungodly hour, aka 6 in the morning, which, trust me, is ungodly and vile. She then took me to the airport, and we had an hour and a half coffee break interlude. We went to this, random coffee shop in nearish Denver. It was, sustainable. I don't know. She found an interesting coffee shop. And then we just, talked for a while, and that was good, because we hadn't caught up in this hot sec. And I was like, since we haven't caught up in hot sec, and I'm driving for a long time, you could take me to the airport, and then we'd have a conversation in a car, which would work out pretty well. And she was like, yes! So, yeah, that was great. Here is the INTP legend herself, a picture of Morgan, which you can't see because this is audio. I really do enjoy talking with Morgan. Very intelligent conversations with a nice sprinkle of nuance and controversy. So yes, had that conversation. She dropped me off at the airport. I then navigated it pretty seamlessly because I've spent enough time at DIA at this point that airports are just like Tuesday. And then on the plane, I decided to listen through the newest artists I'd found and also craft an Idaho playlist of my best songs, which, I very much enjoyed, but Selah and Esther did not, to my chagrin. I charged them with lack of appreciation for beauty. Also, I guess I should explain myself as to why Idaho. See, if you're a long-time Life of Date reader, you may recall that I actually made a very similar expedition about 3 years ago, right before I left on a trip for, California. Back then, I'd only met Esther and Selah once in person, and we, basically only knew each other online. And so our second meetup was hella awkward. Awkward to the degree that I get little twisting cringes in my gut every time I think about it. And, we know that awkwardness was definitely my fault, not theirs, so that makes it even worse. So, needless to say, that didn't go very well, and both Selah and Esther did not really talk to me for a while after that. But then, there was this whole, Esther unfriended me drama, yada yada, and Selah and I got in touch, and eventually it all got resolved. And we started talking again, and it was during one of those conversations that we kind of, compared notes about what we changed, and I was like, we really need to see each other again, because it's been so much has happened, and we're hardly the same people. And then, from there, the trip was just kind of, spontaneously planned. I'm also in a wax season of life, and I had money thanks to CSU, so I was like, well, why not? So yeah, that's why I flew down, a tangent, but here's a picture of Fort Collins from the plane. I was actually able to map my, entire world in one pic, and able to track my rollerblade path from Joe's to my house. That was kind of fun. Anyway, I got to Idaho. I paid obtuse amounts of money for a rental car. Renting a car under 25 is ridiculously expensive. And then I drove down and picked up Esther from the same house she was at last time when I came with Morgan, which was kind of trippy. We then got dinner and got past the awkward part of, oh, hello, hi, person, Because you have to keep in mind, this is the 3rd time I've seen her in person in my life. And more like the 2nd time, because the first time was only an hour at midnight in the sketchy parking lot beside the Myers house, actually, supervised by her dad. And yes, I do know I made questionable life decisions, but we're just gonna pass over that. Regardless, we made it through that awkward stage pretty quick, and for lack of other things to do, we then went driving along the Coeur d'Alene Lake Road, which was actually very peak. Also, new cars with 4-wheel drive and vroom vroom engine. Beauty. The speed at which I was able to hit those winding curves was insane, and much faster than I could have done my Phoenix for sure. I think I was consistently 35 over the speed limit, and it felt fantastic. I actually got so lucky, though, because the 2 times I actually slowed down and was even going close to the speed limit, once because it was a really sharp curve, and once because I was queuing things on Spotify, those were the 2 times that the cops passed me. Hence, I did not get caught for my speedy behavior when, by all statistics, I definitely should have. And I'm not sure how I feel about God providentially protecting me from the consequences of my bad choices, but I don't want him to stop, so I'm not going to jinx it. So yeah, staying like a moron and got Esther joining with me, and it was super fun. She later said my voice was a 4 out of 10, but my karaoke and my vibe was a 9 out of 10. So if I gotta sound like a fool to make you comfortable, I'll take it any day. So we drove for a while. It was a very fun drive. I then arrived at the place Selah and I went last time, and I paid for 1 scoop of ice cream and got low-key 4 scoops of ice cream. I was amazed it all stayed on the cone. It was so much ice cream. I'm definitely going back to that place if I ever go back to Coeur d'Alene. After that, Esther and I sat down by the lake and had a pretty good conversation where I got to catch up on what was actually happening in her life, and I really appreciated that. Here's a little pic of that. And yeah, after we finished our respective ice creams, we then drove back, quickly, if you catch my drift. We then chilled at a coffee shop for a bit since Selah wasn't off work yet, and during that time, I read and Esther called her boyfriend, who she's mega limerent for. And that was a bit vexing because, Esther this whole trip, while she was engaged most of the time, she would just occasionally just drop into her own little world talking to her meat hunk. And that was a touch sad. But, oh well, what can you do? Hot men, am I right? Ben, I'm looking at you. Anyway, Selah got off work, and I drove over there, and it turns out Selah has a stinking nice place. Yes, nice on the ritzy side, kind of nice, rich. But also nice in the sense it just really made you feel very cozy. probably the most at home I felt away from home probably ever. She's an ESTJ, so I suppose, it shouldn't surprise me. But still, her apartment was honestly just epic. Great vibe. Oh, and she's a stinking good cook. She made this, chicken rice dish out of nothing, and it was great. She didn't use a recipe or anything. She just was like, this should go with this. And apparently it does, because her food was beautiful. So yeah, epic food also added to the homey feeling. After we'd all eaten, and I'd gotten them hooked on croissants, because they didn't eat croissants, and I thought they were weird. And I was like, try a croissant, you like a croissant? And they were like, ooh, croissants. Esther and I did some shopping, which I forgot to mention that. The alcohol was busted out, and I decided to join in on the drinking. Of course, that night, over the course of that night, I probably took 6 or 7 shots in total, but honestly, I didn't feel anything. I mean, maybe a little, but nothing significant. But again, that was spread over 5 hours, and I ate a lot of bread with it, because croissants, I like croissants. But, regardless, I mentioned that fact merely to indulge in the fantasy that I am perhaps a heavyweight. I do think that the speed at which you take the shots was very significant, though, because, did 4 shots back-to-back at a different point in time, and I felt it then. It was probably the first time my vision got, laggy, and my mind felt kind of slow, and I was like, oh, this is what people mean by tipsy. Regardless, that first night I did not feel much, but Selah and Esther were pounding it back, because they have a ridiculous alcohol tolerance, and so the conversation was very vulnerable and very good. Genuinely peak, especially in comparison to last time I came. We've all grown quite a lot. Here's a picture of us that night. So yeah, it was a really good night, and Selah gave me a room to sleep in with an air mattress and everything, so I actually slept really well, too. The next day, Selah had to work, and Esther caught an Uber home, so she just, was gone. And so I just slept in because I had the whole house myself. Then later that afternoon, I found this ritzy crepe place, and it was delicious. Here's a picture of my beautiful crepe. Once I got back from that, I picked up Esther once again, and we did a Mayan escape room together in Spokane, and that was actually pretty great. Very well done escape room, and we cleared it with just the 2 of us, so huzzah. I think Esther actually really enjoyed the experience. I don't think she's done many escape rooms. From there, we got really great Greek food at this place. It's called The White House. Tasty, well worth it. I actually love Mediterranean food so much. And then we went back to Selah's in time for her to get back from work, and the 3 of us head off to a derby, aka car go vroom vroom, and here's a pic of that derby. Also, courtesy of Esther, a picture of the 3 of us. Racing is pretty darn fun to watch, honestly. I gotta say. I thought it would be kind of lame, but I don't know, I got into it. Plus, unique experience. So yeah. We were there for ages, though, so it got a bit boring for that reason. Also, we were joined by some of Selah's, old work friends, so that was also interesting. But yeah, it was a good experience overall. I mean, I was ready for it to be done well before it ended, because we were there for 4 hours, and you could only watch cars go around a track for so many hours. But as we were leaving, Selah's ESFP friend was spontaneously like, yo, want to come over to my place for drinks? And we were all like, well, might as well. We got nothing else going on. So I drove us all to this boony trailer house with a massive trampoline, and I just lay on the trampoline, covered in blankets next to a fire for 2,000 hours. Yeah, because everyone engaged in pointless small talk and drank way too much alcohol until 2 in the morning. They tried to get me on the drinking, but I was driving us home, so I was like, nope, even though there was peer pressure. Here's a picture of my view from the trampoline, and it definitely wasn't my favorite time, but because it felt a tad pointless. But I was comfortable, and how often do you get to play on a trampoline next to a fire? Hence, I didn't actually mind it. I hopped in the conversation at a few points, but the vast majority of the time I just chilled and listened. Also, Selah got actually wasted that night, so she did not feel good. She was just falling asleep, and I was like, guys, we better peel out, because Selah was just falling over. Hence, I drove Esther and Selah back to their respective places, and that was the day. The next day, Selah had gotten off work because she knew I was going to be coming, and so we spent the morning sorting random clothes, because she has to pack. She was going to go to Nashville, but that didn't actually work out. Anyway, that's a complicated story. It's not actually my live demo, just spewing this as I talk. Hi, what's up? Anyway, going back to the actual live demo. So, yeah, ESTJs, what can I expect? They make you do chores. But I didn't actually mind it that much. We then took a detour to buy me allergy meds, because, man, something in Idaho was killing me. I was sneezing at least 3 times a minute. It was actually miserable. Ben was also in Idaho with some friends at the same time, coincidentally. We actually attempted to meet up, but we didn't actually make it work. So it was he was 3.5 hours away. Hence, we had the same allergies, so it must be a genetic thing. Anyway, got those on board, felt way better, and then Selah and I got breakfast at this place is quite good. They had breakfast spaghetti, which you may not think would be peak, but it was actually one of the best things ever. Also, the conversation we had then was very fire. Beautiful combo. We then got back and did more things around the house until we picked up Esther, and then came back to Selah's place for some very boring card games with some of her acquaintances. And that's when I did the 4 shots and felt it. And I think that impaired my ability to play Dutch Blitz, because I actually lost. So I'm going to blame it on the booze. But the rest of that night was basically just spent having good conversations once again, because the people left, and then we just got to chill. The next morning, Esther was gone, because she flew out to see her boyfriend in Florida, and unfortunately, the time overlapped with the tail end of my trip, so I was sad. But it meant I got to have some one-on-one time with Selah, so that was honestly pretty big. I always connected more with Esther in the past, but after this, I definitely feel like I'm closer to Selah. We're similar in so many ways, and we really get each other, as only 2 TE Doms can. Honestly, the conversations, though, we had were genuinely some of the best I've had in quite a long time. She let me into her FI at the tail end, and I let her to mine, and it was a super cool experience to be connected on that level. Genuinely fantastic. Anyway, great homemade breakfast, because Selah, again, great cook. We then rented kayaks and paddled around the lake, which started off kind of meh, but eventually I was kind of like able to egg Selah into having fun, and it was actually a blast. Turns out she's scared of water, so, I was proud of her for getting into it. Here's some pictures of that. Boop, boop. And it was actually really good vibes. Selah isn't the most adventurous, so for her this was like pretty exciting, and hence I got excited because she was excited, even though I was kind of like, it's kayaking, nothing's really happening. But she was like, whoa, the waves! And I was like, okay, that's fun. So yeah, I got excited because she was excited. But yeah, anyway, the next thing was also very similar in that vibe. And you might ask, what did we do next? And I'll tell you, it was this. Namely parasailing. Honestly, that's a pretty good picture of us. Signs up over time pretty well. We had this guy taking pictures of us as part of the experience, so Selah got them later. And thus I have these two pictures, which I can include in the live demo, which you can't see them. Anyway, we got dunked, and it was like a little bit of adrenaline rush. But still, most of all, it was just like a scenic experience, not very, like, I don't know, exciting. But I'm still glad I did it once. So yeah, that's the tone for the rest of the evening. We drove to Spokane, where I introduced Selah to float tanks, which I'd only done once before with the squad, but honestly, the experience was basically the same. Very weird, I lose a track of time. Selah and I had separate tanks, necessary for the experience, but once we came out, the general vibe I got was she didn't like it. Like, she got all existential afterward. Apparently, being deprived of all her senses made her mind go burr, and she wasn't very comfortable with that. However, on the plus side, it sort of unlocked her FI, and honestly, I think that's what made the experience, like, so good later in the day. Something definitely shifted in her after that, and I felt like I got to see and know the real Selah, or the raw Selah, I don't know. Anyway, I was all for it, though. From there, we didn't do much officially, but honestly, it was probably my favorite part of the trip, because Selah was just, like, super real. We had a great combo laid back, like, really good combo. Got dinner, had a really good combo then, did some shopping and bought some boxes of mochis, just had fun banter. And then we came back to her place, ate mochi, and then sang old Christian songs, and did this karaoke thing where each of us would, like, sing a meaningful song to us, and the other person would, like, watch. And, occasionally we do dumb songs we both knew, like Counting Stars, which you can never stinking get. That part, it's like, I'll be counting stars, or whatever it is. You never get it. Anyway. That's not relevant. Also not included in live video. You just get a lot of bonus content because I'm narrating this. Anyway, it was a very meaningful experience for me. I'd never done something quite like that before, and honestly, it was just really cool. And of course, Selah is way better at singing than me because she plans to go to Nashville and try and make a career there. So, literally going to be a professional singer. So I just had to kind of pretend I didn't sound bad and get over it. But yeah, other than that, genuinely great. The next day, Selah was back to work, and Esther was gone, and so it was kind of just like a free day for me. I slept in for an age, got breakfast at a crepe place once again because, delicious crepes. Why not? And then I read some, spent some time cleaning up, and then I headed out. I started off the day by chilling at a coffee shop downtown for a few hours because I realized I'd forgotten to charge my headphones, and what is life without music? Let me take a brief water break. During that time, some random girl complimented my shirt, and I think it's the first time that's ever happened to me in my life, so it stuck out to me. I then visited this really empty pub and felt kind of awkward, but they had pretty good fish and chips, so it was a vibe. From there, I went to a game store and intended just to peruse, but once I got there, they were like, hey, we're having a Magic the Gathering pre-release in 5 minutes. You want to join? And I was like, well, I got time to kill, so why not? Thus, I participated in a random Magic the Gathering pre-release, which I had not planned at all. And it was honestly a pretty good time. Also, I got some really good anime cards. So yeah, that took a good chunk of my day, because pre-releases take forever. But I still had like an hour or so to kill, so I decided to hike this hill/nature reserve, things called like Tubbs Hill, that was nearby, without really knowing how long it was or how long the hike would take me, which was kind of risky because if it was longer than an hour, I was in danger of missing my rental car drop-off time and having to pay like another $100 for the next day. But I just winged it. And yeah, here's some pictures of that hike. And honestly, the time pressure and having to like speed hike in the dark made it way more fun holistically. And I made it back like perfectly in time and drove back to Spokane, dropped off my rental car, and then proceeded to read and nap at the airport for like 5 hours throughout the night. I didn't get much sleep, but since my flight was like in 5 in the morning, doing it this way made me save like quite a chunk of money because I didn't have to pay for the extra day on the rental car, and I gave Selah a whole day to recuperate before her new renter moved in, so I thought it was pretty worth it. So yeah, I got on my flight, slept a bit on the plane, Nia picked me up, and we had a decent convo on the way back home, and then as I got home, I crashed. After like a 4-hour nap, I then unpacked, ate food, made pillboxes, listened to the last episode of Personality Hacker I Will for quite some time because I found a new and better podcast, and I basically listened to all of Personality Hacker, let's be honest. Then Grace and I talked on the front porch for a while, then Emerson joined the convo, and then eventually Katie joined the convo, and then all 4 of us hung out and got noodles before I went on a drive with Emerson, and that was great. The next morning began with me working out, and then Katie and Grace joined me for chemo, which took a full stinking 6 hours, because for some reason they'd forgotten to stock my chemo. So they had to ship it from Denver. I'm like, I'm coming, like 2 weeks out. Like, you called me like 3 times to reserve. You're like, do you know your appointment is at 1:10 at Friday, or whatever it is? And I'm like, yes, I do. Anyway, I thought it was kind of dumb. Anyway, eventually, we were like chilling, and this one person came up and was like, hey, you could only have one person with you at a time. And she was very insistent on upholding that rule. So Katie and Grace basically got kicked out. And that was kind of dumb. Thus, they had to do their own thing for a good portion of that time. And not like they really missed that much, because, I mean, I just sit there getting poison injected in my veins. Like, it's not the most riveting of things. But still, it was kind of annoying, because they came to hang out with me at that time. Anyway, chemo finally ended. We got back and it was like 6 p.m., so the day was basically over. So I just did pills and Baldur's Gate listening to Katie, Grace, and Ben do some talking. And then I read some in my room before the Grace gang coaxed me out and got me to watch Inception with them together, which is honestly such a good movie, so definitely well worth it. The next morning, I recorded and sent out the last life update, did Funime, worked on my cancer book, read some, drove to Denver for therapy, during which I called Jordan for a bit during the drive. And then therapy was honestly great. On the way back, I stopped at Noah's house to join him, Joe, and Sam for some magic, which was fun. Did that for 3 hours. Then I got home, finished the book that I was reading on limerence, and then slept. The next morning, I spent like an hour reviewing my Jungian psychology notes before I called with a guy Jess recommended me, and I helped him through some stuff. Paid therapy gig, baby! Also, if anyone wants to, pay me to do therapy with them, I got you. I'm actually fairly good at this. That went well. I then left my room and found Michael, Caden, and Becky, people from New Zealand, and you should know Michael, I think, were chilling, and I got to know them for a bit before I went back to building cancer files and listening to podcasts. After that, I played Friday soccer, which was fun, but a bit low level. However, Emerson, Ben, Becky, and Grace all joined in, so that made it more fun. I also had quite a few good moments and scored some goals. Once we got back from there, there was basically just mostly pointless combos. I typed people, got Caden wrong initially, actually. And then from there, a bunch of us, meaning Michael, Katie, Caden, Emerson, Becky, Grace, and I all went to Alley Cat and played Dutch Bliss for a while. Until I decided to take the Kiwis on a canyon drive, because, why not? And Emerson really wanted to come, so she joined. We then left Katie and Grace their own devices, which I feel a little bit bad about, but they were just unwilling to squish into my 5-person car. It could have happened. I was willing to do it, but they were like, no, they'll be uncomfortable, etc., etc. Anyway, it was a peak canyon drive with one incident, which those of you that were there will know what I mean. But overall, it was quite a lot of fun, and I think everyone really enjoyed it. And yeah, that was basically the day for me. The next morning, I woke up and read some before joining my family on a drive to Wyoming for Sam Wade's wedding. Here's a picture Grace got of us. On the way there, we had some okay conversations, and the wedding was fairly monotonous, as weddings tend to be. But I got to play some cornhole and did pretty well, so that was pretty fun. Also, a lot of dancing, which I actually really enjoyed. Here are some pictures Mom got of the whole occasion. Wedding, etc. We all danced for ages, and I actually really enjoyed it. After that, we went back to our hotel and ended up having a hangout with Lydia, Rika, and Aaron until pretty late, and that was mildly interesting. Then Ben and I talked till like 3 in the morning, and that was a pretty good conversation. I haven't had a conversation like that with Ben for ages, since we used to room together. We got up way too early the next day, so I got like 4 hours of sleep total, and had the worst hotel breakfast I've ever had. It was bad enough that I literally threw mine away and didn't eat it. And then there was some trivial family time before we left and headed home. And on the way back, I was just dead because sleep deprivation. So while the family walked around town, I just chilled at a coffee shop and listened to podcasts. And then did more of the same, listening to podcasts, the whole drive back, while Grace talked with the parents about something. Once I got back, I took a nap, did laundry, worked out, listened to more of my podcasts, read some more, and then journaled before proceeding to sleep. And when I arose, it was time for yet another trip. I packed after I woke up, and then Grace, Katie, and I all went in Emerson's car and began our trek up to the Airbnb in Breckenridge. However, the night before, Grace and Em had pulled an all-nighter, so they were very sleep deprived, and they slept for a decent portion of the drive. We also had a very significant conversation on the way up, but I won't go into that too much. Then Katie and I dropped off the other two at the cabin, because they were all dead, and we went grocery shopping. We forgot the mac and cheese. Even after we explicitly were do not forget the mac and cheese, our whole grocery run, then we had to drive back. It was annoying. I have a few pictures of where we stayed. It was very pretty. And then from there, Katie and I had a meh conversation on the front porch until Grace woke up, and then she woke Emerson up, which made Emerson very grumpy, and then Grace got upset, so then I mediated the whole thing with Katie and mac and cheese. Once that worked out, we all watched Twilight, which was genuinely garbage, before I got entangled in texting Charlotte to try and have her not hate me, while Katie and Emerson were hearing what I was saying and being like, you idiot, and totally siding with Charlotte the whole time. Come on, guys, you're my friends. But oh well. I mean, which is kind of fair, but what can I say? I'm honest. So, yes, I understand it wasn't the perfect thing to say, but I was being honest with Charlotte. So, you know what, Emerson, Katie, you may have been right, but I stand by my actions. So, yeah, I did that until late, and then I went to sleep. The next morning, Katie and I naturally got up before the others, so we just made croissants, tea, and read our respective books, which was honestly quite peaceful. Then, once Emerson got up, we played some rounds of Dutch Blitz, and then Grace joined us. However, she was in a bad mood, so that was unfortunate. And then from there, we went down to town, and I have a picture of me doing a thing. And then after that, we ate food at this cool place where I actually got to talk about philosophy once. Yay! And then we went to the car to find we had a $40 parking ticket, which the worst part was when we came back into town later, and we paid to park because we no way we were getting a $40 ticket again. We then figured out the parking cost was literally 50 cents. So we got a $40 parking ticket because we didn't pay 50 cents. Ugh, deeply vexing. Once we got back, we did these little eye mask things, which honestly just kind of burned your face. And of course, in classic girls' slumber party tradition, we watched more Twilight. It didn't get better. It was at the tail end of Twilight 3 that the Kiwi people came over, and I was like, yes, I've been saved. And at this point, I have no pictures because Emerson, my usual photographer, was, let's say, distracted. But regardless, I have memory, so who cares about pictures? We did a lot of dancing before going on the porch, and then me and Katie sat and contemplated while saying occasionally deep things, while the rest of them sang songs that Grace sang with her ukulele accompaniment. Also, Becky has a really good voice. After a while, we migrated to the hot tub, which was very nice, very good stars. Everyone talked about a lot of nothing for hours, and I was bored out of my mind. But eventually, Michael and Emerson went up to do something together inside, and then Katie did her own thing. And so me, Grace, Kaden, and Becky were all in the hot tub. And then from there, we actually had a really good conversation. Granted, it was type-focused, as so many of my conversations tend to be these days, but still good, and I think they got a lot of value out of it. So yeah, eventually that wrapped up. We all went inside, and after doing more pointless conversation for quite some time, I decided to just go to sleep, because I value my health a little tiny bit. I got 6 hours of sleep, so not garbage. The next morning then consisted of just cleaning up before we left. And there was honestly, like, a very painful conversation on the way back down. But, again, I won't go into that much of that. We're still working through that. But regardless, we eventually made it back home. I parted ways with people, and they did stuff, and I took a nap. However, when I woke up, I was still feeling emotional from the conversation on the drive back down, so I decided on a limb to try and talk to Nessa about it. And that did not go well. Which, granted, is mostly due to my unreasonableness when I'm emotional, as anyone who's seen me emotional can attest. But I was still grateful that Nessa showed up, even if it didn't help. That ended, and I talked with Mom, and that was like a tad bit better, but also not super helpful. And it was at that point, since I was still feeling it, that when Katie hit me up and she was like, I want to talk about what happened, because I feel bad about it. And since we were both hurt, I was like, yes, let's do it. And then we went on a drive, and that was actually really, really good. Having someone else who's going through like the same thing and being able to bounce ideas off each other can be very therapeutic. So yeah, that actually did make me feel better, and then I played some Baldur's Gate once I got home. The next day, I had breakfast and then head off to chemo. After chemo, I listened to some podcast stuff for a few hours before then going to therapy, sorting through some new music, and then finally getting back home in the evening and doing Funime, Baldur's Gate, and journaling. I then had another call with the guy I'm doing pseudotherapy for before going to Joe's house, and then talking with Johanna, which went as well as could be expected. After I got back from that, I then played Magic with Noah and Joe until it was time for soccer. The Kiwis, Grace and Ben, all showed up for that, so it was very fun. However, the Kiwis were not acclimated to the climate, so they just died. Also, it was very rough because it was so hot, like killer hot. So none of us played our best for sure. Still, I had some good moments in there, scored some goals. After soccer, we were all kind of like crashed because, bleh. But we decided to like arise again and go over to CSU to play some spike ball, in which Caden was actually really good. And that was fun. And then I went back early from that and did Funime and anime because I was like, I'm tired. And then I attended a meaningless walk, which I should have just dipped on, but I didn't because social pressure is now a thing for me, apparently. So yeah, that mostly sucked, but oh well. You win some, you lose some. The next day began for me by walking around with Jake and him telling me about his new theory me telling him about the new theory I'd be learning. I then attended the Myers grad party for Benj and Johanna for 8 hours, played a lot of volleyball, a good amount of spike ball, and a really good conversation with Joe, which was honestly just fantastic. That was very good. The one sucky thing about events like those, though, is afterward you feel so sweaty and gross. Like, I was out in the sun for so long, it kind of, like, ruins how I feel the rest of the day. This happened to me for soccer, too, actually. There's just, like, something about the heat that just murders you. But regardless, I had a really good time because sport and socializing always makes me feel like I've spent my day fairly productively. Once I finally got home, Mom made good food, which I consumed happily. I then played Baldur's Gate for a while, took pills before going to sleep. Where'd I go? Oh. When I showed up to Southgate the next day, it turned out it was his little feet service, which is basically a service in which a bunch of children from third world countries come and dance and sing in order to, pull money from the sympathetic crowd. Which, I was a sympathetic crowd. I gave $20, so to be fair, I can't criticize greatly. And I think it's honestly cool. It's just calculated and very effective. So it triggers my inner, sus critic. But I mean, I gave them money, so hopefully that indicates I do believe that my sus critic is wrong. Even if he's still sus. Anyway, I did that. And then I socialized briefly before going over to Benj's way too hot car with Joe, Karina, Nessa, and of course, Benj. And see, the OG plan had been to bring Anna, Nessa's bestie, but she dipped once again. Hence, in a on-the-fly compromise, we grabbed Joe and Karina, and honestly, that worked out quite well, and it was quite a lot of fun. This was for Nessa's birthday. We arrived at Cinzetti's, drenched in sweat, and hot because the car was so hot. But the woes of the car ride were soon forgotten, because that place is just epic. My SE got, actually giddy with all the different varieties of endless food. And it's a buffet, which greatly contributed to the SE giddiness, because, I can eat all of this endlessly, and the answer is yes. Yes, you can. Hence, I was very happy as I ate copious amounts of pretty decent food. And it wore off in an hour, and I was, only giddy for a hot sec there, but still, I enjoyed the experience very, very much. And honestly, it was probably the favorite part of Nessa's birthday celebration. We stayed there for a while, I don't know how long exactly. But, and we also had the waitress sing happy birthday to Nessa. And, like, the whole building joined in. And she was so embarrassed, which was great. Anyway, after eating, like, 5 bowls of ice cream, we then departed and journeyed to our destination for the day, which was Meow Wolf. And sadly, I must say, seeing it the second time, I was pretty let down. Like, don't get me wrong, it wasn't a bad experience, but it wasn't even close to the awe and excitement I felt the first time. The second time, it was kind of like, oh, this is cool. And I split off the 2 couples pretty early on because I just wanted to do puzzles. And I started, like, reading lore. Reading lore takes ages. And I did solve 2 major puzzles, but then Joe comes around with solutions that he just looked up. And I was like, because, I mean, technically, yeah, he was able to get in the locked room. I spent an hour trying to figure out how to get in that locked room. But yeah, overall, it was still a good experience. I was the only one that had been there before, so I think the rest of them all enjoyed it quite a lot more than I did. And honestly, it wasn't a bad way to spend the afternoon. We got back from there, and we decided to add Joe and Korean to our Glenwood spring trip because they were just vibing very well. And yeah, honestly, that was a very good decision because it made the whole time a whole lot better. But more on that later. After we parted ways, the celebration having been celebrated, I then messaged Jake at length over Discord about his new I'm actually an INTJ theory before doing Funame and talking some with the Grace Gang and then sleeping. Then, after sleeping the next day, I rose once more to leave for yet another trip. Ben and I carpooled to Myers, and we ended up taking the Myers van, because 6 people, which is somewhat of an awkward number to fit. So, because we all have 5-seater cars. Actually, let me pause for one brief moment as I get my water. Okay, and we're back. Okay, let's see where I leave off. Okay. Let's see. We went on the trip. We got in the van. We were all pretty dead and melancholic starting out because we didn't have much energy. But once we got going and we got to Walmart, we did eventually kind of ramp up. And the funny thing is, after we got to our Airbnb, we discovered the power was out. So we basically just did nothing and lounged around for quite a time until life came back into our abodes, wooden bones. We then walked around the neighborhood and found a place to play spikeball where Benji and I did crisscross arms spikeball and lost consistently. But it was very fun and we put up a good fight. And then, yeah, after we came back and the power came back on, we were like, yay! We played a version of a Rummy, which I didn't know, but everyone else knew. And here's a picture of that. It has some other name. And then we ate miscellaneous food before heading to this niche hot springs that Ben knew of, which turned out to be super cool. They're basically like all natural, a great temperature, and a pretty good depth. And there was only like one other dude there. And granted, it was a naked dude, because hippie vibes, but it was so dark you really couldn't tell. Conversation was mostly boring, and I genuinely didn't mind that too much, though, because I was just like staring at the amazing stars and admiring the very cool hot spring. But then at one point, Joe and Ben were like, hey, Alex, what do you think of the conversation? And I was like, I'm bored, but I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. At which point they were like, you're not supposed to say I'm bored if you're bored. And I was like, oh, okay. And then the conversation became about talking about how I should talk. But, regardless, it was actually more interesting that way. So I was okay with it. Even though that happened at the hot springs. Oh, no. Even though what happened at the hot springs wasn't peak. The hot springs themselves were definitely peak. So I'm definitely going to remember that spot. However, by about 2 a.m, Nessa was dying and Ben was tired, so we decided to call it and go back home. And honestly, that was probably a pretty good time to call it. The next morning, I began reading a book, which I bought, but it turns out it's like a Machiavellian hate everyone to gain power book, so I didn't read it. Well, aside from mocking purposes to everybody. And then, after a morning of bacon and breakfast sandwiches, we then went down to this little coffee shop that Ben liked and played some Polytopia. That game was prevalent throughout the whole trip, which I actually very much enjoyed. And then we just sat there for a while. And then we walked around the city, and I got kind of bored, but I had a good podcast in the mix, and then I actually really enjoyed myself. We hiked up this hill to visit some 1800s famous person's grave, Doc something. And, Ben and I hiked up. Those were like, I don't want to hike that, because it was actually kind of hot. And, that's fair. But the view from the top was very interesting, even if the grave was kind of, boring. After we did a bit more walking around, we then drove back home, made food, and ate it while watching K-pop Demon Hunter, the movie, which actually was based. Here's a picture of Nessa that Nessa got during that. That movie was actually really great. Thereafter, Nessa made us really good mocktails. She's a legit bartender, so they were really good. And we all chilled in this hot tub and conversed until like 3:30 in the morning. And those conversations I genuinely did really enjoy. Very peak. Here is us in the hot tub. The next day we dropped Ben off so we could go do his own thing because he didn't want to go up on the roller coaster with us. And the rest of us arrived at the main attraction. See, the reason why Glenwood Springs was chosen as a location is originally way back before untold numbers of people bailed on us. The plan was to hit up like the best roller coasters in the country, which is in Ohio, not Idaho. But since that was a very big ask, we had to rethink the trip. And I remember this YouTube video I watched a while back about the country's highest roller coaster in Glenwood Springs. And I was like, guys, we could still get roller coasters and have a unique experience. And I was very right about that. I mean, like, check out this experience. Like, the roller coasters atop this mountain, peak. I will say, like, the views, Plus, they had, like, some rides that went over the edge of, like, a cliff where it's just, like, that's, like, 2,000 feet down. And you're like, oh, Very good for giving you an adrenaline rush. So yeah, there's a summary of roller coaster pictures if you want to see them. Yep, pretty epic, honestly. The swing and the spinny chair vibes were way better because they took you out over the massive cliff, and looking down was quite the adrenaline rush. I just said that, that's funny. However, my favorite ride personally was the tower drop, which dropped you into a mine shaft, and that was actually so much fun. Like, it's a drop ride, but just goes down. Overall, quite a good experience. There weren't that many rides, but the lines were super short, and it was also, like, a pretty good trade-off for that reason. We spent, like, 6 hours up there in total, and honestly, that was probably a good amount of time. Like, long enough to do everything we wanted, but also short enough that we didn't get, like, burnt out. So, overall, very good experience. Once we got back down and ate, we then ended the night with a final hot tub convo, which was impactful, but I ended up heading out of the conversation early because something was sore that was talked about. But overall, still a very good conversation. Everyone got in from that around 2:30 in the morning, and then we like all went to bed, and that was it. We woke up the next morning and began to pack up for the drive home, and I don't know exactly which this picture came from, so I'm just going to include it here. It's a Ben with a pillow mustache. And also, we all gender swapped our faces at one point in time because we got kind of bored, and that's crazy. Benj is just charity. I personally think that Ben wins for the best gender swap face. He is genuinely hot. And also, Benj is literally just charity. Like, we did it a few times, and he basically changed between being Karina, Charity, or Lily. But he was always some Myers girl or another, which is actually pretty funny. And also, I just need to include these 3 other pictures for self-evident reasons, because they're great. Ben's model potential just went up my mind significantly. Anyway, we packed up, hit the road, and stopped at a coffee shop on the way back, and then we drove back to the Myers, and once stories were told about the whole trip, and the telling came to an end, I then drove Ben back to his place, and we had a really good convo on the way back. I then did a tiny bit of Baldur's Gate before spending a brief time with the Grace Gang and Noodles, and then having quite a long talk with Jake over at his place, which was big interesting. I then got back from that around midnight, and just went to sleep. The next day, I worked out before hopping in the car for yet another trip, this time for our family friends, the Macy's. We've been taking trips with them at a rate of about once a year for ages now, so this marked the end of a season where that tradition was going on, because Eliana is now going off to college, Grace is moving to New Zealand, Amelia's getting married, and I don't know what's happening to me and Ben. Perhaps we might have another one sometime, but this was at least plausibly the last of the family trips, which is kind of crazy, because we've been doing them for like 15 years. SI traditions, am I right? Anyway, regardless, I drove with Ben, Grace, Eliana, and obviously myself, and I took time to listen to podcasts during that. Then we played some Dutch Blitz once we got up there, had some conversation on the front porch, did some s'mores out back, and then came inside to have a late night combo with me, Ben, Amelia, and Eliana, and that was pretty good. However, that night I got like low-key 3.5 hours of sleep, so I did not feel well the next day. I then worked on this life of the email for the next 3 hours in the morning when everyone was still sleeping, because I woke up with the sun at like 5 a.m. Had a very boring conversation with the parents on the front porch, ate breakfast, did more work on this life date, watched watched an anime movie, which was actually okay, and then the girls all made like shirts and stuff. And then we did more Dutch Blitz, which I will say I did lose, which is unfortunate. Had dinner, watched Carry On with Everybody, which is a movie that we were going to watch on the Glenwood spring trip, but no one really wanted, well, Nessa didn't want to watch it, so we didn't have watching it. But I got to watch it later, which was actually really good. And that was actually pretty good. And then I opted out of another night of fire because I was just like way too tired. Here are some pictures Mom took of that whole event, which you can view if you want. And yeah, finally, as for today, I actually got good sleep last night. We had breakfast, cleaned up the cabin, stopped at this cool little tiny home / camping place, which had like an Airstream coffee shop. So yeah, very vibey. And then I finally got to rest. I took a nap, ate food, took pills, and since then I've been working on finishing this. And see, I told you it would be quite long. Quite a bit happened. But I was glad I got to do it all. Especially toward the end, though, I was definitely feeling tired. So I will admit that I have learned a lesson, which is that I have energy limits. Point made and well noted. Regardless, thank you for reading. I hope you found this one interesting. And as always, feel free to hit me up. And until the next live email, I bid thee adieu.